Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to today's session, where we then discuss issues around the improvement of performance and efficiency in the public service through taking of prompt corrective action and the administration of lawful consequences for infractions in the public service. My name is Alex Moneki from the Office of the Chief of Staff and Head of the Public Service. And please allow us to begin or to commence this session with a word of prayer. And I'll request my colleague, Rogers Chumba, to please pray for us. Karibu Chumba.
Good afternoon, everyone. Let's pray. We thank you, God, for this lovely afternoon. We thank you for taking good care of us. God, as we go back to the sensitization on lawful consequences for infraction in public service in order to improve efficiency and performance, we pray that your presence be with us until the end. In Jesus' name I pray. Amen.
Amen, and thank you very much, Rogers. At this point, before I invite our chief guest to give us the message from the Chief of Staff and Head of Public Service, allow me to just reiterate some protocols that we have used for all these meetings hosted by the Office of the Chief of Staff and Head of Public Service. Protocols that may be familiar to some of you, as we have seen you have complied. They were on the screen before we commenced, but allow me to reiterate these protocols so that then we get it right. The first is how we introduce ourselves in the chat section. Now, the chat button is at the bottom of your screen, indicated chat. You click on it, and then you type in one message, your name, your designation, and the institution in which that you then are in. So in one message, please don't type your name and then send. Then another message, you type your designation and send. No. We want it in one message. And the purpose for this really is for the accountability of who is attending this session and who is not. So please remember to indicate in the chat section your name, your designation, and the entity that you are joining this meeting from in one message. We have seen and noted, and some of you have actually done as is required. If you're sitting in a group, please again in one message, write the name of the institution at the top, then list in number form all the people who are joining from that institution and are logged in using one device. So if it's NEMA, for instance, that we have seen register, or cadres, where there's a number of people in one meeting, please indicate the name of the institution or the entity or the department, and then list all the persons who are present and joining using one device, as we have noted, and the feedback that the office has received from your accounting officers is that people have been facilitated to sit in groups for those where it's possible. Others have told us they're in the field, but also joining on the call. So if you're sitting in a group, please do indicate your name, your designation, as well as the entity in which you serve as a public servant. Then again, at the bottom of your screen, you will see an icon indicated Q&A. Remember, this is question and answer. So in the Q&A section, please indicate or post questions that would require answers. Remember not to introduce yourself in the Q&A section. The introductions are in the chat, and in the Q&A, we have questions that would require an answer. And later on, as we continue with this session, as we have all introduced ourselves, if you have any comments or information you'd want to share or new ideas you'd want to share that you're implementing in your state departments, in your agencies, you can then use that. You can then post that in the chat session. And perhaps, again, our team will look at the questions that you post and will respond to as many as possible during this period. But as we'll inform you later, those questions that will remain unanswered, we have a mechanism of dealing with all the questions that will be asked during these trainings. Now, as you ask the questions in the Q&A, please remember the questions should be limited to the content of today's presentation. So the questions should be around the conversation that yourselves and the Office of the Chief of Staff and Head of Public Service will have this afternoon. So do not ask a question about the weather forecast or about other things that are not part of this discussion. So let us limit so that our team is able to answer to as many questions that are in reference to the topic of today, being the improvement of performance and efficiency in the public service through the taking of prompt corrective action and the immediate administration of lawful and proportionate consequences for infractions as and when they occur in the chat session. If time allows and you'd want to say something, please raise your hand towards the end, and our team is going to, or rather switch on your microphone, noting that the format in which these meetings, and this is because of the immense numbers that there are, is a webinar format. So the panelists have the microphones on, but the participants' microphones are off. But if you feel that you must say something, if you have a comment, a question, or idea, or suggestion, a reaction, and you feel you'd want to do so, please do so. Please raise your hand, and our team is going to see you and get back to you. Now, it's important, and I'm sure a majority of you have registered in the Google platform. And the requirement before joining this session is that one needed to have registered in the Google form. And the Google, the link for this particular meeting is still available on the website of the Chief of Staff, Head of Public Service. Your accounting officers were given this information. I'm certain it has circulated in the WhatsApp groups. Please ensure that you register in the chat section. You register in the Google form. And why it's also important is that, and maybe just to preempt one of the questions that we have seen occur in the previous sessions we have had, this being the third of such session this week, is whether we are going to share the material that is going to be used to sensitize you this afternoon. And the answer is yes. Both the PowerPoint presentations that will be done, as well as the recording of this session, will be sent to you to the emails you used to register. So please ensure that you do register in the Google form so that then we close that loop of sharing of information and material to yourselves directly. You attended this session, you want the information, you want to refer to this information. So ensure that you do as we have kindly guided. And maybe perhaps as you introduce yourself again, because I see there are some new people who have joined in, indicate in one message your full name, the State Department, the agency that you're joining us from, as well as your designation. Are you a manager? Are you the CEO? Are you a senior officer, principal officer, whatever cadre? Because this is a meeting of all public officers, of all cadres, in all workstations in the public service. And when you introduce yourself that way, we are able then to take note of who attended from which institution, and be able also to feed back to your accounting officers, as well as a record for the Chief of Staff and Head of Public Service on who actually attended. And when you introduce the entity, because we have seen some of you have done the introductions in the chat section with the short forms of your institutions, please ensure that you write the institution in full and not in the short form. Again, in one message, your name, designation, and the entity in full. So perhaps that's part of the protocols. I will remind you again as we continue, and also for the benefit of those who will join us as we proceed. Now, it is now my absolute pleasure to invite the Principal Administrative Secretary in the Executive Office of the President, Mr. Arthur Osia, to give us his message for this afternoon. Karibu sana, Mr. Osia.
Thank you very much. Am I audible, Maniki?
Yes, sir, you are.
Okay. Distinguished public servants, it's a good afternoon. On behalf of the Chief of Staff and Head of Public Service, I formally welcome you to this afternoon's engagement which brings together all public officers of all cadres in all stations in the public service of Kenya. Your being here reflects a shared responsibility in ensuring that our institutions work as they should. As you are aware, we already launched this framework for improving of performance and efficiency within the public service by requiring that we take prompt corrective action and administration of lawful consequences for any infraction committed. What we are doing today is to reiterate and reinforce the message and strengthening implementation. This is a continuation of the conversation, a reminder that accountability and performance are not seasonal commitments, but daily obligations. Kenyans expect a public service that works efficiently, ethically, and consistently. They expect services to be delivered on time, public resources to be protected, and the standards to be upheld. They may not see our internal processes, but they experience the results of our actions or inaction. That is why we are insisting that every public servant puts on his A game at all times. As you are aware, the matrix of lawful consequences is not something new. It is anchored in existing laws, policies, and regulations. It simply provides clarity and consistency in how we respond when standards are not met. The rules are known. The expectations are clear. Where there is negligence, persistent non-compliance, absenteeism, disregard of lawful instructions, or chronic underperformance, there must be timely and proportionate consequences. Let me emphasize, this is not about punishment for its own sake. It's about restoring discipline, strengthening professionalism, and protecting the integrity of public service. It's about ensuring fairness so that those who work diligently are not demoralized by the actions of a few who choose to disregard their duties. Colleagues, as officers from this office, we will reiterate, we have observed recurring issues like delayed responses to audit queries, failure to comply with the policy, directives, projects undertaken without proper approvals, and matters left unattended until they escalate. Sensitization alone is no longer sufficient. We must now act promptly, consistently, and lawfully. Again, please be reminded that this framework applies to all of us, regardless of rank or position. No one is exempt. Accountability is not selective. It is institutional. At the same time, we fully recognize and appreciate the many officers who serve with dedication, integrity, and commitment. Accountability will go hand in hand with recognition. Excellence must be visible, encouraged, and rewarded. What we now require is simple but firm. Prompt action, early correction, proper documentation, and consistent enforcement of standards. We are at a stage where reforms must translate into measurable results and impact. This is not about reports written or meetings held. It's about services delivered, projects completed properly, resources safeguarded, and citizens served with professionalism. Let us also remember our responsibility to comply with all applicable laws, including county government requirements when implementing development projects. Approvals, permits, and environmental and social impact assessments are mandatory, not optional. Where there are gaps, they must be regularized within the stated timelines. As we move forward, we must always remember that we are custodians of public trust. Every action we take and every action we fail to take has consequences for the citizens we serve. The time for awareness has passed. The time for consistent implementation is now. Let us each play our part faithfully, professionally, and without hesitation. As the Chief of Staff and Head of Public Service has consistently underscored, we must do better, collectively and decisively. The expectations and demands of Kenyans leave no room for mediocrity. As public servants, we must be seen, we must be felt, and judged fairly as being facilitative, responsive, and with the attitude to serve our country, which is indeed a solemn calling that we, the few selected, are blessed to be part of. Finally, on behalf of the Chief of Staff and Head of Public Service, I wish you productive deliberations in this engagement. We appreciate your continued cooperation and count on your full and active participation in today's deliberations. With those many remarks, I would now like to invite Dr. Linda Musumba to take us through the context setting. Thank you very much, and once again, you are most welcome. Welcome, Dr.
Thank you very much, Mr. Arthur Osia, the Principal Administrative Secretary in the Executive Office of the President, for those preliminary remarks that you have made that actually point the direction in which the Chief of Staff and Head of the Public Service is actually intentional and intended with regard to these talks. I am happy to be able to reconnect with everybody on this forum since last November when we met. It is nice to be able to see you all who've registered as single persons and also registered in groups. We see you, throughout, in the chat section as you register yourself, and we are grateful to be together in this forum. Now, this series of meetings began in February, and they're going on until the middle of March. However, for this particular session, which addresses all public officers of all cadres and in all duty stations, comes to an end this Friday. So if you have colleagues who have not yet gone through this sensitization, kindly advise them to do so, because the more we know and the more we understand things, then the more relevant we become in our service stations, and the more we understand why we are doing the things that we are doing. The Head of Public Service always says that you have to interact with people to affect how they think and how they view things. You have to interact with people to be able to impact on them so that they can be able to understand the reason why it's important to do things in a particular way. As you're aware, the standards for public service are always being told, by the president himself and by the chief of staff and head of the public service. And therefore, these meetings are supposed to create that forum where we are able to repeat those messages and people are able to understand them and be able to ask questions in the Q&A so that to the best of our ability and in relation to the topic at hand, we're able to respond to them. The aim of all this is to change our attitudes. Sometimes, as a public servant, you may have a don't care attitude. And the don't care attitude may come from the fact that you joined that office or that duty station and found people with a don't care attitude. Or you developed it because you felt certain things weren't going the way they should in your workstation. So these meetings are called to sensitize us about changing our attitudes towards work, changing our attitudes as patriots of this country, changing our attitudes so that we're able to be aligned and attuned to the right attitude for public service. And you'll find these things in the Constitution of Kenya. It's also, the meetings are called to change our culture. You all remember during COVID, when we were taught how to wash our hands. It's not like we were not washing our hands before, we were always washing our hands. However, the Ministry of Health released guidelines about how to wash hands. And I trust that those, the how to wash hands has remained with us until today. So it is to be able to, cultivate in us a new culture in public service where we are more responsive and we are more aware of the people that we serve because it's the citizens of Kenya. Now, the other thing that the head of public service emphasizes in these meetings that are going on now is changing. It matters for us to change. Somebody may be seated there thinking, but why should we change the culture? Why should we change the attitude? I came and found it like this, and it has been like this for many years, and so forth and so on. But if you look at countries that today are in the front, front seat of being, modern countries that are very responsive to citizens, they reached a point where they made a decision and they decided to change. And this is our moment to change. And we are changing because it matters, because each one of us in this call is heading towards our sunset years. Even if you are 20 years, you're an intern, 18 years, you're 25, you're 30, you're 45, you're 60. It matters that we should change our culture because tomorrow we shall require services of government as senior citizens. We'll require the pensions office. We shall require to be able to attend health institutions. We shall require all these different, offices. And when we require them, we are working today to ensure that tomorrow when we need those services as senior citizens, that we're able to get them in a manner that is quality, in a manner that is timely, and in a manner that makes us happy. It also matters because our children are using these services. Our children use these services when they go to schools. They use these services when they apply for their IDs. They use these services at very many different points, in hospitals and in all these places. So why we should do a culture change is because we want our children, when they go for services at the various points, that they are accessing good services and they're accessing them in a manner that makes them happy and feel proud to be a Kenyan. And then lastly, it matters because we are working with the children of our children in mind. The children of our children. The children of our children should come and find when we who are now in government at this point have changed things and that they are so pleasant and it's a wonderful country to live in. So it's a legacy that we are leaving for the children of our children. And when we do our things with that in mind, we shall find that we have to start today to be able to create that Kenya that the children of our children will enjoy. And then finally, before I call my colleague, Collins Kiprono, who is the Secretary Legal Affairs here at the Office of the Chief of Staff and Head of the Public Service, why does this meeting include all public officers of all cadres and from all duty stations? Someone might also be seated there and wondering, But why couldn't they have called Ngaos alone? Why couldn't they have called drivers alone? Why couldn't they have called, our staff in our embassies all around the country, all around the world alone? And the reason is because, first and foremost, as a public service, we are a family as a public service. We are privileged to be in these positions where we serve the public, and therefore we need to be speaking one language. We need to be having the same culture and the same attitude. When I go to Wajir, when I go to Lamu, when I go to Kisumu, when I go to wherever it is in the public offices, the attitude, the culture should be one. And the culture and the attitude is one of also respecting one another in our job stations and taking notice that we are all bound by the same ethics, and the Constitution, of course, is the one instrument that provides the pathway for all of us to be able to follow as we carry out our job. So we are happy to welcome officers across the different job groups, in this meeting, because as public service, we are one big family. Well, Collins, karibu.
Thank you very much, Daktari. And thank you to our boss, the Principal Administrative Secretary at the Executive Office of the President. Colleagues, as you've heard, my name is Collins Kiprono. I'm the Secretary Legal Affairs at the Executive Office of the President under the leadership of the Chief of Staff and the Head of Public Service. Colleagues, my duty this afternoon is to lay basis on, in addition to what Dr. Linda Musumba has said in terms of setting context why we are here, is to lay basis into the administrative structure of government for us to be able to appreciate why this meeting was called, and the convener of this meeting being the Chief of Staff and the Head of Public Service. Colleagues, just to take you back to our high school or primary school lessons on what government is, I'll take the shortest possible time because it's just a refresher. These are things that you know. You just need a reminder on the structuring of government. Colleagues, we understand that we have three arms of government. That is the legislature, that is parliament, that is bicameral in nature, that has the Senate and the National Assembly. And equally, we have the executive office of the president. How is the executive that composes of the executive office of the president? How is the executive aligned as per the Constitution, as per the law, as per the executive order? Colleagues, at the helm of the executive is the president, and the president, being the head of state and government, directs and coordinates the national and the executive functions in totality, and there can only be one president at a time. This is as enumerated under Article 129 of the Constitution. When you go to Chapter 19, the functions are clearly stipulated. Under the president, there is the deputy president, who is the principal assistant of the president and performs functions which are assigned by the president. This is equally enumerated under Chapter 9 of the Constitution, and the deputy president equally has the oversight that is undertaken by Parliament where applicable, but the deputy president is the principal assistant and advisor to the president. The second cadre under the executive, colleagues, is the cabinet, which issues policy direction and coordinates government as a whole. This is equally established under Chapter 9 of the Constitution, and Parliament also conducts the oversight. They are accountable to Parliament. That is the different committees and even Parliament as a whole. That is where the cabinet is. And the cabinet is composed of the cabinet secretaries, who are the heads of the different ministries that we have as a country, totaling to the 22, and they act as the sector policy head. They provide leadership at the level of the cabinet level, decisions being made, and equally, these are appointments that are made pursuant to the Public Appointments Act, and that's why they are vetted. They need to undergo vetting in Parliament. Equally, under the same cadre, but the Constitution thought it wise to establish it as an standalone office is the Office of the Attorney General, who is the principal legal advisor to government, and they are established under the Constitution of Kenya 2010, together with the Office of the Attorney General's Act, as amended in 2023, which espouses the roles of the Attorney General, but they are the number one defender of government in terms of all litigations. And that is why in all our entities, once there is litigation, from the lowest possible point up to the CS level, even up to the president, it's the Attorney General that defends all our offices. Under the Attorney General, we have the principal secretaries, and these principal secretaries are at the department level, and they are administrative heads within the different state departments that are established, as they provide leadership and the accounting officers for these different state departments. And these PSS now have the public entities which are parastatals that operate under them, and these different MDAs that are under the PSS have the boards, because at that level of the State Department, we now have the state corporations, which each state corporations have boards that provide the strategic oversight in terms of governance, in terms of risk, in terms of performance, and the general supervision of management within the different state corporations. And the appointing authority, in most instances, but they differ from the different enabling instruments, is the cabinet secretaries, and they are bound by the State Corporations Act, that is CAP 446. And as all of you know, that at the end of 2025, we passed a law that is the Government-Owned Enterprises Act, that now places these GOEs, the 68 of them, to be under the leadership of the National Treasury. It is the National Treasury that is supposed to provide oversight. But for the entirety of the others, they are still bound by the State Corporations Act, and they are under the leadership of the different boards. And for these particular boards, we have board chairpersons who are supposed to provide the lead and ensure that there is governance, effectiveness, and interfaces between the parent ministry and these particular state corporations. So the different entities provide that these chairpersons, in a lot of times, are appointees of the president, except when the enabling provision provides otherwise, including the appointment being done by the cabinet secretaries. Equally, now sitting in these boards are the CEOs, the MDs, director generals, depending on the context of the enabling instrument, who are the heads of the management. They run the day-to-day operations, and they implement the strategy, and they act as the leads and management, and they are more often designated as the accounting officers, and they have their accounting responsibilities. But the appointment is equally done by the board of management. So the employer-employee relationship exists between their respective boards and now themselves. So you find that these are the providing legislation with this particular entity are governed again by Mwongozo CAP 446, or any law, any written law that guides our entities. Now, under the CEO, noting that the CEO, the MD, depending on the context, or the DG, depending on the context, there are now GMs, the general managers, who are the senior cadre of management that report to this CEO. And their function is to offer leadership to a particular limb in which it is provided in their organogram. It can be the GMHR, it can be GM operations and GM ICT, GM corporate affairs, that envisages a couple of mandates that is under them. So this GM is where now ourselves, we report to them. And now, depending on the approved HR instruments of our particular entities, we find that this role and reporting line is cascaded up to the level where all of us report, because under the GMs is where now you find their directors, their deputy directors, their officers, their principal officers, up to the level all of us are in. So, colleagues, we appreciate how the executive starts from the president being at the top up to the level where we are. So we are part of the executive, everyone who's seated in this particular meeting this afternoon. So I just wanted to set context for us to be able to appreciate that indeed we are the government. When someone says the government has failed, it is not anyone else but ourselves, because we are part of the executive. It's just that now the reporting structure starts at the level that I've explained, from the president to for us to be able to appreciate how we come into the grand bigger picture, and now how the chief of staff and the head of public service has been able to call us for this meeting. Colleagues, at this point, it's important to point out that the reason why we are here this afternoon is we've been called as all public officers in all cadres, in all stations in the public service. And the reason why we've been called this afternoon is to address the issue of improvement of performance and efficiency in the public service to optimal levels through taking prompt corrective action and the immediate administration of lawful consequences for infractions within the public service. When my colleagues will be making their presentations, they'll explain what we mean by these immediate lawful consequences and the infractions. They'll go to a greater length in explaining what we mean by infractions. It might be a bigger term, but when it will be dissected, you'll notice that infractions is what we experience every day while undertaking our mandate in our different entities, colleagues. And why are the chief of staff and the head of public service called for this meeting? It's important to know that, colleagues, that the chief of staff and the head of public service does not have a mouth or a pen of his own. The chief of staff and the head of public service does not communicate either verbally or by way of circulars and letters to our different entities on his own motion. He does not do it suo moto. He does not do it on his own motion. He only does it because he's doing it at the behest of the president. He acts as the mouthpiece. He acts as the messenger of the president. He only speaks on behalf of the president. So even when we are calling for this meeting has been called because it is done with the authority and permission of the president. And why am I emphasizing on that aspect? Colleagues, I'd want to introduce at this juncture two very simple terms, the term of software and hardware. Colleagues, in the lingua of IT, a software is what cannot be felt. A software is what ensures the machine moves, like the software that is being used to ensure that you can hear me way in Toronto. You can hear me in some village in Turkana. I can be heard in Lunga Lunga. Is because the software of the gadget that you're using, be it the laptop, be it a phone, be it a tablet, be it a MacBook, is because there's an enabling software that enables us to do that. But at the same time, we have a hardware. The hardware is what you can touch. That gadget, the aspect that you can touch is the hardware. And with that analogy alone, colleagues, we appreciate that the hardware cannot work without the software. And whereas the president is working to fix the hardware, we as public servants come in to ensure that we are able to fix the software. And what do I mean when I say the president is fixing the hardware? When the president is doing a transformation of the country, he's fixing the hardware. When he's creating 2 million jobs across the different diverse sectors through a sustained mechanism that have been put in place, that is the president fixing the software, the hardware. When the president is deliberate in transitioning this country from a third world economy to a first world economy in our generation, when he's having his roadmap towards ensuring this country transforms into Singapore within our generation through productivity, through economic freedom, through shared opportunity, the president is fixing the hardware. When the president entered into a social contract with the citizens. Because colleagues, we should remember that every 5 years, a person who aspires, like all of us do, to be a president of this country, they enter into a contract with the citizens. And this contract is for 5 years, renewable only once. They do a blueprint of the promises that they make that they hope to fulfill. Like the current president did a promise under the bottom-up economic transformation agenda. And that bottom-up economic transformation agenda had pillars that the president said, look here, these are the things that I promise to do within a certain period of time. And you will judge me in the ballot to determine whether you return me or not. So the president is fixing the hardware when he's doing the brick and mortar, like all our gadgets, the things that we can touch and feel. And you find that the president, in undertaking his bottom-up economic transformation agenda, has addressed the issue of agriculture and food security. And that is why there's been a policy shift from consumption to subsidizing production, a production-led support. And this has been able to deliver a tangible food surplus to farmers. And the reason why we're saying this is, at the moment, there's been about 7.5 million farmers digitally registered. You find that there are over 21 million bags of subsidized fertilizers delivered to our different regions. This has increased. First things first. This fertilizer used to be retail at around 7,500. Now is at 2,500, saving farmers over 105 billion in the single biggest driver of production and growth. You find that, colleagues, while the president is fixing the hardware, is addressing the issue of maize production, which arose from the 44 million bags 3 years ago to about 70 million bags at the end of 2025. And this has gone towards reducing the prices of unga in our shelves from 250, now retailing at around 130. Why am I talking about this issue, colleagues? This is the president addressing the issue of the hardware. When you go to the issue of tea earnings, for those colleagues who are in these regions, tea earnings have increased to 215 billion. That is from 154 billion as of 2022. Coffee earnings are rose by 73% in early 2025. It is getting to around 80% by the end of this year, with the expansion of acreage that is currently under coffee to 115,000 acres. Edible oil, the acreage has increased to around 114,000. This is the president fixing the hardware. When you go to the second pillar, of course, if I go about talking about the agriculture pillar, I'll go on and on, because you'll talk about cotton gineries that have created 700 new jobs, 100 high volume grain dryers that have been distributed across the country. But let me just, because of the interest of time, let me go to the second pillar, which is the MSMEs and financial inclusion. Colleagues, you notice that the president has introduced mechanisms of addressing the mamamboga, addressing the border guys, the MSMEs, through the Nyota, this Nyota product that was rolled out, colleagues, from the beginning of last month, with a very huge target. When you look at the Hustler Fund, which is now disbursed with over 80 billion Kenyans having access to it, there is 26 million Kenyans who have now formal credit scores having been removed from the different entities that had declared them not to be able to access credits. The president is fixing the hardware. When you go, colleagues, to the issue of housing and settlement, the current housing units, we are talking about 250,000 housing units being delivered nationwide, with about 500,000 direct and indirect jobs created, with employment projected to hit 1 million workers at the end of this year. That is the president fixing the hardware, colleagues. 4.4 billion has now been ring-fenced for Juakali artisans supplying construction materials, which is a novelty. But, colleagues, that is the president fixing the hardware. There are around 178,000 students who a month ago were taken under this housing project. That is the president fixing the hardware. Colleagues, when you go to the other pillar of healthcare and universal health coverage, the president has ensured that we have a paradigm shift when it comes to the healthcare, how it's being done in this country using the universal healthcare coverage. And the president introduced, with the assistance of parliament, 4 pieces of legislation that revolutionized how healthcare is being conducted in this country. And for that reason, we have about 27 million Kenyans registered. Actually, it's now in excess of 27 million registered under SHA. We have more than 10,000 health facilities which have been onboarded. We have in excess of 110,000 community health promoters who are currently undertaking level 1 and level 2 healthcare. That's why they go to the homes and they're able to detect illness, especially the chronic ones, at a very early age. We are able to address the issue. The president, while fixing the hardware, has had a change in how KEMSA undertakes. And that is why you've noticed in the last 3 years, we've not had a KEMSA scandal, because that pillar has been addressed. Colleagues, when you go to the other pillar of digital superhighway and creative economy, you find that the president has connected 24,000 kilometers of optic fiber cable, which has increased by 50% in the last 3 years. There are public Wi-Fi's, there are 22,500 government services digitized through eCitizen. We know the story of eCitizen and how all of us now, when we need to make payments, we have to do it through eCitizens. Colleagues, we can go over and over about the pillars. When you go about security, education, and social protection, immediately the president got into power. He set up a presidential working party that was able to address the issue of education that was almost grinding to a halt, all the way from primary level, the high school level, the tertiary that includes university, was almost grinding to a halt. But there was a complete overhaul on how that was being done. And the reason colleagues have taken the last 8 minutes or so to explain the hardware is the president might be very good at fixing the hardware, but we as civil, as the entire workforce of public service, if we do not fix the software, the gadget will not work. The country will not achieve its dream of going to Singapore. And that is why the Chief of Staff and the Head of Public Service, while undertaking this mandate on behalf of the President, has ensured that we have this session to sensitize ourselves, to be able to address the teething issues that have been there, to ensure that we have optimal performance within the public service. And colleagues, with that, let me now jump to the presentation that is now projected, and I hope all of us can be able to see, is what is the role of the Office of the Chief of Staff and the Head of Public Service for us to be able to convene at this meeting and address these issues that we've discussed, colleagues. Let me start by laying the basis in which this office is established. Colleagues, this Office of the Chief of Staff and the Head of Public Service is established pursuant to the National Government Administration Act, that is Act number 4 of 2024, and with particular reference to Section 8.3 that provides that there shall be established an Office of the Head of Public Service, and the Head of Public Service shall double up to be the Chief of Staff to the President. And these functions are further provided in granular details under Executive Order number 1 of 2025. And there are about 6 high overarching functions that the Chief of Staff and the Head of Public Service performs. Number 1 is that the Chief of Staff and the Head of Public Service is the administrative head of the Executive Office of the President. He or she shall perform that function on behalf of the President to ensure the seamless working within the Executive Office of the President. Number 2 is that the Chief of Staff and the Head of Public Service has an overarching mandate over all public entities. And this is done again at the behest of the President to ensure that there is proper supervision of the entire public service. And this is worked towards ensuring proper functioning of the government of Kenya, because this is a workforce that has more than 1 million people strong. This is a workforce that has more than 400 different state corporations, because all of us function under different state corporations. So he ensures that this mandate is undertaken on behalf of the president, but ensures the public service is working. The third mandate, colleagues, is he promotes ethics, good governance, efficiency, and effectiveness in the provision of public service through the deployment of the rightful skills, the rightful values, leadership within the entire Kenya public service. All of us seated in our different offices, colleagues, it is the mandate of the Chief of Staff and the Head of Public Service to ensure that a statistician is not put in to act as a plumber. An electrician is not given the roles of a lawyer. An IT specialist is not put to ensure that welding is done at Ketraco. And while the Chief of Staff and the Head of Public Service is undertaking this mandate, he's not doing it in isolation. He's doing it in tandem with the Public Service Commission, he's doing it in tandem with SCAC, it's doing it in tandem with our respective boards, he's doing it in tandem with our different HR entities, the heads of HR and the HR committees in our different institutions, so that all of us are ensured there is a pool of talent, because we are lucky as a country to have enough pool of talent to be able to provide these services. The other role of the Chief of Staff, which role number 4, is to transmit the executive directives and orders and presidential proclamations to ministries, state organs and state departments and agencies for their information, implementation and other action. Colleagues, we know that from time to time we receive circulars from the executive office of the president, we receive circulars from the National Treasury, from State Law Office, we receive circulars from the Public Service Commission, Salaries and Remuneration Commission. All this is done to ensure that the machinery that is government moves in a smooth manner. The machinery that is government provides services to the citizens. So it is the mandate of the Chief of Staff and the Head of Public Service to ensure that all these circulars, all this communication that is done to our different entities, they are done in consonance. They are not done in a way that they work in cross purpose. All of them are supposed to work to ensuring the citizens receive their services as they should. Equally, colleagues, as the role number 6, as enumerated in the executive order, is the Head of Public Service transmits policy advisories by way of circulars towards the public service. This speaks to what I've just mentioned in terms of the circulars being disseminated. Equally, the Chief of Staff and the Head of Public Service is expected and is responsible for the overall effectiveness of the public service. Because remember, colleagues, our number 1 client while we are undertaking our mandate in the public service is the citizens. So while the public service works in a smooth manner, this will only be reflected by services being rendered to the citizens, services that is palatable, services that the citizens would enjoy, because those are our number 1 client. And it should never be lost on us that just like a supermarket has walk-in clients, our number 1 client is the citizens. So that we should ensure that all our services should be tailored towards a citizen-centric services. With that, colleagues, I'll come later to speak to other issues, but I just wanted to lay the basis, and I wish to welcome my colleague Alex Mwaniki to take it over from there. Thank you for your listening here, colleagues, and I look forward to coming to the tail end of this webinar this afternoon. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Collins, and thank you for laying that basis of the role of the Chief of Staff, or the Office of the Chief of Staff and Head of Public Service. And before we then dive straight into what's ahead, just allow me to acknowledge some of you that we have quickly picked from the chat session. Thank you from the chat section, and thank you for introducing yourselves. We still note some short forms being used or just names being posted. Please remember, if you joined us after we did the protocols, you introduce yourself with the name, designation, and institution. If you're sitting in a group, again, all of you list the name of the institution list the name of the persons who are, present watching using one device, so that we're able to capture your details correctly. And I've seen a big list from the KWS. There was a list of 40 sitting together, facilitated to follow through. Another list of 28. We see and appreciate you. We have seen big teams from the State Department for Immigration and Correctional Services, ICT and digital economy. We have seen the teams from the Public Investments State Department, Housing and Urban Development. We've seen your big numbers present. The State Department for Children's Services, Interior, and many members of Ngao present, right from the county commissioners all the way down. We have seen State Department for Defense, including the various, barracks as your stations. We see a note and notice you. State Department for Cabinet Affairs, the State Department for Blue Economy, Foreign Affairs, TVETs, and the various TVETs joining individually from the National Polytechnics, the TTIs, and so on. We've seen correctional services and quite a number of you serving in prisons. But also allow me to just call out a few people that we have quickly picked. Teresia Muita from Nuclear Regulatory Authority in Mombasa. We see Seth Kingori, a senior management accountant at HELB. Lawrence Wekesa, a cook at the Ministry of Defense. Mohammed Ibrahim, Kenya Forest Research Institute, Wajir County. We see the team from NEMA, Taita Taveta County, 3 of you in one message. Rebecca Wangeshi, Head of Corporate Communications, Kenya National Library. We see Kenny Omolo, working for the Kenya Meteorological Department, stationed at Eldoret Airport. Engineer Duncan Ndeki, a Chief Superintending Engineer, the State Department for Petroleum. And we've seen Alfred Mbula, KMTC Mwingi Campus, working in the Security Department. Caroline Batingei, Secretary, I think is an economist, Office of the Prime Cabinet Secretary. We've seen Juliet Akoth. And this particular one for Juliet Akoth from the Kenya Prison Service, you only provided your name. There was no designation, so we're not able to fully celebrate you. Please reintroduce yourself, name, designation, institution. Mohammed Abdi Ibrahim, a senior clerical officer. This is the National Registration Bureau of Statistics, and I've seen quite a number of you, but Mohammed Abdi is joining us from Mandera County. You've seen John Chilchil, Deputy Director at the Kenya Tourism Board. Fatuma Juma, a senior chief, in the Ministry of Interior, joining us from Likoni Sub-County. Regina Werimo, minor, a clean at Karatina University. And I think we have quite a number of, and you can see some of these in your chat section, agencies that are present in big numbers. Kengen has been constantly reintroducing themselves. KEFIS, Machakos University, the Kenyatta National Hospital, the Kenya School of Law, Affordable Housing Board, Kenya Space Agency, REREC, big lists coming in from yourselves, big teams also coming in from the Jaramogi Oginga Odinga Teaching and Referral Hospital. We have quite a number of you joining us from NYS. IRA, we see you. SHA, the team from SHA, joining individually. I see Mr. Yeli Mule, a firefighter at Kenya Airports Authority. We see the Kenya National Bureau of Statistics, Narok office, a list of you. The Kenya Vision 2030 Delivery Secretariat, we see you. Kefri, the big number from Taita, also joining us. Madam Salome Kagosha, Minister 1, Kenyan Embassy, joining us from Kinshasa. Thank you very much. We also do note the presence of Ambassador Geoffrey Kaituko, joining us from Ottawa in Canada, which is just some minutes past 6 o'clock. And his entire team is dialed in all the way from Canada. So we thank you all and welcome you all. We'll continue calling out your names. Government chemist, we see that you're on the call. So please introduce yourself correctly, your name, your designation, as well as the institution that you represent, and we will also call you out once we see you and if time allows. There are so many names in the chat section, in the thousands, so we cannot call everybody now. We'll call you in groups, even as we continue to see how you've you're registering in the introduction. Remember, the question and answer is still open. The questions are being answered. Please remember to stick to the theme of this session. If the presentation could please come up, so that we then quickly run through the next bit of this sensitization session. And as it comes up, again, maybe just to reiterate that the reason that the head of public service has called for this meeting is the focus here is to just deepen that message of improvement of performance and efficiency in the public service through taking of prompt corrective action and administration of lawful and proportionate consequences for infractions when they happen in the public service. So we must continuously know that the backbone of this entire conversation is continuous improvement of performance and efficiency to optimal levels in the public service through those two means. And we'll speak in more detail about them. Maybe for context, our past, Dr. Musumba and Collins, you've really just set that context straight. You have gotten it spot on the responsibility of the Chief of Staff and Head of Public Service, drawn from the Executive Order number 1 of 2025. And also just to reiterate that continuous improvement of performance and efficiency in the public service is a key priority of this administration. And this can only be achieved through the right software, as Collins Kiprono correctly indicated. If we get it right on the software, then the journey to Singapore becomes a very easy journey. Now, you are all aware, or most of you may be aware, that the head of public service maintains a system that is able to check from time to time, how are we doing as the public service? Now, a quick review or an evaluation of that system late last year revealed two critical weaknesses that have affected a public service that is operating optimally. Now, the first weakness is the failure to take prompt corrective action. The failure to take prompt corrective action. And my colleague Collins calls this as PCA, that we are not taking PCA. And PCA really, what is prompt corrective action? And the whole conversation around prompt corrective action revolves around early intervention. What is that we are doing as a public servant of any cadre? And it's important to note that he instructed that this meeting has to be held with all public servants of all cadres in all work sessions in the public service. So we all have a role, we have a responsibility, we have a duty to ensure that in our respective cadres, in our respective roles, that we are able to bring out the issues that would correct things before they deteriorate. And maybe some quick examples. You in your institution sit in a, let's say, a procurement, you're going through a procurement process. You're in the tender opening committee or evaluation committee. Let's just go back to the previous slide. Or in the tender evaluation committee or whatever committee it is. And you see something going wrong at the onset, at the beginning of a process. Or you work in a hospital and there's a machine that you've seen is faulty. And that if this machine is used on a member of the public, it may result to a fatal incident. You know that the machine is faulty, but you then sit back and say, it is not my responsibility. I'm not even a technician, but I just know that machine is faulty. You have a responsibility. And it's part of fixing the software that if you see something going wrong, something is wrong, don't wait and say, no, there's someone else who's responsible and it's not my duty. And the head of public service is saying, we all have a duty as public servants to ensure that those early interventions, you are a driver in a public entity, or you're a driver in a public school, you notice a fault in the bus that you use to ferry students from point A to B. you don't bring it out early, and then these consequences that follow, yet you would have arrested that spoilage or that deterioration if you took prompt corrective action. You are in the finance and accounts department, and there are processes that come to you which then go to other departments all the way to the point of payment. Something is wrong and you can see it. You have a responsibility, you have a duty to raise and correct it. So the focus here is on containment, ensuring that things run as they should. And we know these things. We are experienced government employees. We know what is right and what is wrong. We know how things should work and how they shouldn't. We have a responsibility. You're a nurse, you're a doctor in a public hospital, you are a nutritionist, name it, any position that we serve in whatever cadre have a responsibility to ensure that prompt corrective action or PCA becomes part of our DNA as we serve the public. So that was the first failure, that this is not happening. And if we are able to cure this weakness, then there's a big shift in the improvement of performance and efficiency in the public service. Now, the second weakness that was witnessed or that the system revealed was the failure to administer lawful and proportionate consequences. Now, this second weakness, the focus here is on duty bearers. You are in charge of a unit, you are a supervisor, you are the transport officer, you are a senior officer, a principal officer with members of staff under you, you are a head of department, you are an AIE holder, you are the accounting officer. You have staff under you who do certain things or conduct themselves in certain ways that is not acceptable. The head of public service is saying that you have a duty to administer lawful and proportionate consequences whenever there's an infraction. And one of the questions we have received in the past is, what is an infraction? An infraction is what the government would call, the government language would be misconduct, or you infringe or you break certain provisions that are provided for, whether in our employment laws, whether in the public service manuals, procedures, regulations, whether in our internal policy documents from the finance policy manual, ICT policy, HR policy, and so on, whether it's in the codes of conduct that exist in our unique institutions. Whenever there's a breach of any of those processes that exist, that is an infraction. In other words, ni makosa, umefanya makosa. So what happens when those things happen? And we'll talk further about this second element of the lawful and proportional consequences. Now, if we move to the next slide, and this next slide really is on what then do those two weaknesses, what is the impact of failing to take prompt corrective action, of failing to administer lawful and proportionate consequences for infractions? And one of them is that because we're not taking prompt corrective action and things are going, there's no consequence for however we conduct ourselves, there's slow delivery of government promises and services. There's a decline in the quality, quantity, and timeliness in which we deliver services to the public. And because no action is taken, the person who is a duty bearer, your supervisor, does not take any action however you perform or however you conduct yourself, then a culture of impunity and persistent non-performance becomes the order of the day. And this is the impact that if we were able to deal with those two weaknesses, the failing to take prompt corrective action and the failing to administer, if we deal with those two weaknesses, colleagues, that culture of impunity is out. The software is fixed. The software is updated. And that is the message, that we must now update the software. The times we are living in are not the times of the past where certain things would just go unchecked. And this is the message, that we must then deal with that culture that we have inculcated in certain places within government, and then therefore leads to persistent non-performance. And as Dr. Musumba did indicate, the reason we are doing this is not for ourselves, but for the children, our children, our children's children, who will one day sit in the seats that we sit on, and if not in the seats that we sit on, in another seat, in a different state department, in a different agency, in a different, high commission or, office. So we have to do this and get it right for our generation. And therefore, the response for this is what is the subject matter of today's session: the taking of prompt corrective action and the immediate administration of lawful and proportionate consequences for infractions in the public service. Now, moving on to the next slide, we will skip the next two slides because that is on what is the impact, what is the expected outcomes. And because we have indicated before that this will be shared with you, you will get a chance to look at all these slides and see what it is. And some of those outcomes have been addressed by Dr. Linda Musumba as well as Mr. Kiprono, and also our past when he made his remark. Now, the hierarchy and oversight, and as you will see shortly when we just do a sample of what is this lawful consequences, which have been curated in the format of a matrix, start from the top, from His Excellency the President, who has an obligation or to exercise direct authority over presidential appointees. And we have seen the President swing into action, reprimand, suspend, revoke CSs, PSs, board chairpersons, advisors, and so on. So it starts from there. So he is in a position of responsibility with people directly under him that he has power then to exercise direct authority. Now, we all have the Chief of Staff and Head of the Public Service who leads the enforcement architecture through circulars, directives, referrals, and cross-agency coordination. Collins did a very good job in articulating the role of the Chief of Staff. Then we have the Principal Secretaries and Accounting Officers, again, across board, where you are accountable for internal enforcements, performance, monitoring, and compliance, reporting across MDAs. Again, the bottom line here is improvement of performance and efficiency to optimal levels. Again, boards, and I think Colin spoke quite clearly about the boards, oversighting the CEOs and senior staff, including the initiation of formal disciplinary proceedings. We then have the oversight agencies. We have the Ethics and Anti-Corruption Commission. We have the Directorate of Criminal Investigations. We have the Inspector General of Corporations, especially coming to boards, who would then handle referrals that involve criminality, corruption, financial loss, and so on. So the hierarchy then exists. And the next slide, as we look at the due process, that in as much as we are in our various positions, that we are now administering lawful and proportionate consequences, then due process must be guaranteed. The heads of human resource function and the office of the Chief of Staff did have a meeting with all heads of a human resource function because they serve as the implementing arms of all disciplinary procedures. And in doing so, they must rely on approved HR manuals, PSC regulations, and the relevant employment laws. They are also responsible for initiating investigation, the processing of warnings, the whole disciplinary process from beginning to end. And one of the things that the head of public service indicated is that they must, so should we all as public servants, keep abreast with the new learning and jurisprudence from the Employment and Labor Relations Court, as well as all appellate courts. There's so much jurisprudence coming in on matters of employment. Ensure that you're well appraised of these new learning and jurisprudence because it informs you on how you conduct yourself. Because if you conduct yourself outside those established jurisprudence, that would amount to an infraction. If we move on to the next slide, we just want to reiterate, and the head of public service has indicated that every process that amounts to the administration of lawful and proportionate consequences, that due process must be guaranteed. And there are three things that he has indicated to be highlighted in this session. And the first is that the consequence must be proportionate to the infraction. Ile makosa umefanya, the consequence has to be proportionate to the infraction. And your heads of human resource understand this very well. So that if, depending on what it is that has been done, what are the consequences for that? Now, the second is that it must be lawful. So it is not a head of department or a supervisor just waking up in the morning and saying, this is now a consequence because you came late to the office. What is the instrument that enables that consequence to be issued? Is it PSC regulations? Is it our internal, manuals and procedures? Is it our code of conduct? There has to be an enabling instrument. So it has to be very objective, that the code of conduct that we abide by indicates that as a public officer in this institution, I should do A, B, C, and D every day I get into the office. And if I do not do A, B, C, and D, that same code prescribes what happens to me. So it has to be lawful and based on an enabling instrument. Thirdly, and most importantly, is that it has to be procedurally fair. And this includes the right to be heard. The process has to be fair, and it's important, again, as persons who are duty bearers, as we administer these lawful and proportionate consequences, we must be mindful of the tenets of procedural fairness in our administrative processes. Now, if you are an officer who has been a subject to a consequence because of something you did or did not do, you reserve, if you feel that how you were treated or the consequence that befell you was not fair, was not just, was not right, then you retain the right of appeal. And the Public Service Commission is the constitutional body that handles all disciplinary grievances, as well as the courts of law, now being the last resort for judicial review and legal redress. Now, let's quickly just look at what are these prerequisites of consequences. What must we keep in mind before we administer these consequences for infractions? What must we keep in mind? And the first is the question you must ask yourself. You are a duty bearer. You are in a position of responsibility. You are a head of department, unit, directorate, name it. The questions you must always reflect on is the member of staff sufficiently instructed? Could the infraction have been caused because the instructions were not clear, they were not sufficient? Were they written? Because the way we instruct the people who are under us is dependent on the instructions that we give. Is the member of staff sufficiently guided? Are they mentored? Have they been sensitized? Have they been trained? So, and if the answer is yes, then you move on to the next stage of taking the consequence. And if the answer is no, it is a point of you reflecting as a person who is in a position of responsibility to ensure that all your members of staff are sufficiently guided, they are mentored, and they are trained. Now, has sufficient effort, and this now goes to the PCA, prompt corrective action. Has sufficient effort been made by management to secure prompt corrective action? Are there procedures, processes, and systems within your entities that promote, that facilitate people to, promptly correct issues? If I come and indicate to my supervisor, over there I've seen the machine that is being used in the lab is faulty, will there be now consequences to me for saying those things? If you're in a position of responsibility, you must be mindful of ensuring that there's sufficient effort within your entity to promote the prompt corrective action. Now, is there sufficient documentation about the infraction? The person who is now a subject to these consequences, have you given them enough documentation to then show that this is what you are being accused of, or this is what that you have done? This is all the documentation that is needed. You have, and again, this again talks about the tenets of fair hearing, that I was given sufficient documentation to defend myself as a public servant. Lastly, has that member of staff been given a safe or protected opportunity to express or explain themselves sufficiently? Again, tenets of fair hearing. So you must reflect on these questions and many, many more that you may have before you take action on officers that are under you. But remember, if you're in management and joining in this office, reflect, have we put in sufficient effort as management to secure prompt corrective action? With that, I thank you very much. And as I invite my colleague, Rogers Chumba, who will take us briefly through the curation of that matrix of lawful consequences. And this document is a template, as he will expound. It's a template that you can customize, make it better, add more content, remove that which does not apply to your entity, and have it in a way that you can then disseminate to your member staff, the current and the new ones that will keep joining your entity as and when they report. It's really the do's and don'ts. And the source of this document is existing documents that have sort of been curated in a very simple format for anyone to understand. The Constitution, the employment laws, the public service regulations, and so on. So as the document comes up, Duncan, I would like now to then hand it over to Rogers. Please take us through the next session. I thank you.
Thank you very much, Alex Moniki, Collins Kiprono, Dr. Linda Musumba, and our past Arthuzos Osia for the elaborate explanations of the targeted sensitization within public service. So before I proceed, I would also want to give some shout outs to some of the people who have joined this call. I can see Kelvin Sambai from KFIS has joined this call. Thank you very much. And he's informed that he's also joined with his colleagues. There is also Eric Wafula from KPA. We have Peter Kinyanjui from KEMSA. We have Lucy Kathy from Children's Services. So my duty this afternoon, colleagues, is to go on and cement some of the information that has been given to us by my colleagues ahead. But before I could proceed to explain anything, I want us to consider a certain case. A department in any of these public entities has issued a tender worth 50 million. During the procurement process, the tender is not advertised publicly as required by law. The company that is owned by a relative of the procurement process is awarded the tender. The price of that tender is inflated far above the market value. And then this person that was awarded the tender supplies the equipments or the products below the standard and does not meet specifications. If you consider this case, you will realize that there is a lot of infractions that have occurred in the process. So the reason why this matrix was curated was in a way to try and cure some of these infractions so that we can avoid situations where the citizens no longer trust public service. As Collins explained before, the head of state wants to fix the hardware, but the people who fixes the software is all of us in this call. We have been doing this sensitization since Monday, and the target is that we must reach everyone within public service. So the intention of the matrix, as Paz said before, is not to punish anyone, but it is intended to enhance efficiency and performance within public service. How are we going to do this? By administering lawful consequences for infractions within public service. So the intention is just to change the culture. And the other reason why we are doing this is because we want to leave a good legacy, because Dr. Linda Musumba said before, we are in our sunset during our sunset days within public service, we want to leave an image that in the year 2025, 2026, something very, very positive happened. Public service changed for the good. So, colleagues, we are doing this sensitization because we want to channel our direction to the first world. Because sometimes you realize that within public service, some of the behaviors or actions that happen actually do not conform to the spirit of moving to Singapore. You need to sometimes sit in your desk and ask yourself, does this behavior lead us to the first world? You as the head of a department, when you allow certain infractions to occur without taking prompt corrective action or administering any lawful and proportionate consequence, do you consider the fact that we are eroding public trust? So the intention of this sensitization at the end of the day is to make sure that we build a public service that is people-centric, and a public service that achieves or meets the highest expectation of the public with regard to public service. So without saying so much about the background and the setup of the matrix, I'm sure you've been able to check from the website of the head of public service, this matrix, which has been posted and was uploaded last year. You'll be able to see this matrix in entirety. But my role here is just to go through it in a quick way to just see some of the infractions that usually happen within public entities, some of the target entities or the public officers, and the corrective measures, and the entity responsible or the duty bearer. Now, the head of public service said, we are not intending only the junior officers within institutions or head of departments. The matrix is intended to correct any kind of infraction from the top office, from the office of the prime cap, from the CSs, secretary to the cabinet, even the head of public service himself is saying, if there is an infraction committed by me or even any of my officers, there should be a corrective measure or a measure available to correct this mistake. Now, you see, the first one is overarching consequences for infractions regarding non-compliance. So the president makes directive. If there is no compliance, there is a corrective measure. And this part is implemented by the president himself. And we have always used an example of saying, sometimes you see on a Friday, the government printer puts up a gazette, a special issue that someone has been revoked. Some appointment has been revoked. So this is a corrective measure by the head of state. If you go down to on the consequence for infraction, there is this part of infraction related to conduct of chairperson. So the chairperson, the CEOs, and the senior staff, if there is a misconduct by you as an officer, the target entity being senior staff, the corrective measure that need to be taken promptly could be reprimand, deferment of increment, constrained promotion, surcharge, or termination. If there is a misconduct by any other staff, you as the CEO or the head of HR, you are supposed to take a prompt corrective action to correct this infraction by reprimanding the officer, deferring increment, constraining promotion, and termination. And we can go back to the example that I had given before on procurement. You see, the infraction here was conflict of interest. And that is why we have this infraction on conflict of interest. To correct this infraction immediately or promptly, the officer that is charged, the head of department, and you can see from here the president himself, and the president has pronounced himself in so many cases. There was a case of an institution before where they did wrong procurement and certain people are supposed to be awarded, and the president revoked the appointment of the whole board, including the CEO, because we want to correct some of these mistakes. The next infraction is related to a PFMA Act. And you see, the example I given also relates to application of the PFMA Act. You see, when you allow, you exceed budget ceilings, when you give unauthorized budget reallocations, when you fail to keep proper financial records, when you do not comply with procurement laws, when you fail to remit statutory deductions. And this is a mistake that usually happens with most of the institutions, that there are statutory deductions from the accounts of employees, but when they go and look for their service, they don't get it. And we are glad that with strict application of matrix and applicable laws, some of these have started reducing, but it has been very rampant. That is why we have eroded the public trust. So as an officer, the accounting officer within that institution is supposed to take prompt corrective action. And what would be that? It could be demand immediate retirement. If the infraction here is failing to account for cash advance or interest, you must retire interest promptly. Number two, the accounting officer could do a written warning, do a surcharge, or debar further interest. And you know, when a further interest is debarred, it means you as an officer, when you go to a duty outside your station, you might not get any allowance. So this is also another part of infraction that relates same case with the example I had given, because BFMA and all these kind of procurement issues is to abuse of office. So this other infraction is on procurement, as so many examples, which include deviating from procurement procedures. And you could see from the example I had given, you have issued a tender without following the law. What happened in this case? Because you're going to pay a tenderer who did not actually meet the specifications, it leads to loss of public funds. Again, because this tender was awarded to a relative or the procurement officer, it means that fair competition was distorted. Now, the other issue includes we have failed to adhere to evaluation criteria, which is an infraction. So breaching these procurement laws could mean that accounting officer, if he is to take prompt corrective action, then he could institute internal investigation immediately. He could institute suspension or disciplinary action. And in the worst case scenario, ESCC. And you've seen that ESCC currently, anytime there is a case that they are handling, it will be posted on their website. And I'm sure you as an officer, you wouldn't want this situation to happen to you. So it means if we correct these mistakes, we wouldn't find ourselves in this situation. Lastly, we have other infractions. You could see, if you log into the website of the Head of Public Service, you could find this matrix posted. You could still go through it one by one. So the last infraction that infraction that I could explain is on infraction related to leadership and integrity. You see, this matrix is not only is intended to everyone, and sometimes you're given responsibility. You're the head of a department, but do you apply leadership as per standards? Are you ethical in your operations? Do you favor others? Do you misuse your office? Do you fail to address public complaints? Because some of our offices actually belongs to the citizens. How many times do you allow yourself? How many times do you give service to the citizens as expected? What is the turnaround time? to give service to the citizens? Do they go home satisfied or they are not satisfied? So infraction related to leadership is all about what I've stated. You could also be abusive or unprofessional in your conduct. So as a head of a department, and this is a call to all public officers who are charged with responsibility. If these kind of infractions occur within your department, you need to take prompt corrective action. And what is the corrective action here? Take disciplinary action immediately. If this kind of behavior occurs many times, and we are saying you don't need, you don't take high level kind of punishment, it has to tally with the kind of infraction. So sometimes you can be removed from office because the behavior has persisted, or the kind of infraction is too harming. Say that the only way to solve that problem is to remove you from office. And these officers as well could surcharge, and at the worst case scenario is to start criminal prosecution. And usually, you know very well that when there's criminal prosecution, Subaria Mambaru has to do that thing. And you don't want to find yourself in such a situation. So it's not a threat. It's not a way of punishing anyone. We are saying for us to head to this first world, for us to head to Singapore. I'm using Singapore symbolically because it's a first world that has been in our situation some years back, but now it's a different story altogether. So for us to be there, let the things we do within public service be that makes everyone proud, so that many years later, you come back and look at what you did while you're serving in the public service and you are proud. Lastly, this matrix is not a document that exists in as an island. It's a document that has been prepared in conformity with Constitution, employment laws, and any other relevant laws. It's not a document that was created from nowhere. It was crafted from all these enabling legislations. Because you could see that we have around 28 infractions. But does it mean that there are only infractions that exist? No. It means that you can apply these laws to take prompt corrective action so that we can forestall any further deterioration. So our message is we can only enhance performance and achieve efficiency if we administer lawful consequences for infractions in the public service. With that, I welcome my colleague Alex Mwaniki, who will usher in the next speaker, who will tell us now what's the call to action. What are we supposed to do to head to Singapore? Otherwise, thank you very much for listening to us, and we wish you a lovely afternoon and a lovely week ahead. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Rogers. And I think you have articulated that very well. Again, just to note, but all this information will be shared with yourselves through the email addresses that you registered with. And again, if you have colleagues within your institutions who are yet to go through this sensitization, please do let them know that this is happening. We still have 2 days left, tomorrow, Thursday, and Friday, so that then we cover the entire public service. At this point, I would want to quickly just call in Collins Kiprono to just give us the call to action, and how does then the days ahead look like. If we could maybe put up the presentation so that my colleague Collins Kiprono can take us through the next stage. Karibu, Mr. Kiprono.
Thank you very much, Alex, and thank you to the colleagues who presented. Mr. Chumba Mwaniki, our head, Dr. Linda Musumba, and our boss, Arthur Osia, for the very sacrosanct presentations that I've made. So, colleagues, I come at the tail end, and I wish to welcome all of you to belt up for me to paint a picture of what we just need to take home as we attempt to head to Singapore. And we really appreciate our colleagues who've logged in from overseas. We have the High Commissioner to Ontario, Canada, Madam Caroline Kamende. And we have Ephanthas, a procurement officer from Nyahururu, Samuel CTNA from Kengen. We have Grace Ayeni, and all of you seated in your offices, that is the State Department for Public Service, for taking time to be able to join this session. And for our diaspora colleagues in our different embassies, before we talk about Singapore, we hope that you will be able to give us an opportunity to experience whatever good practices we are getting from your respective countries virtually. Now that technology has enabled us to do a meeting in Nairobi, and there are people in Ontario, we have people in Accra, we have people as far as Brasilia. I've actually seen our embassy in Brazil logged in for them to share experiences and what we should be able to emulate as best practice. And colleagues, as I've told you, let's belt up and take a few notes on what are the take-homes from the beautiful conversations and presentations that have been made by my colleagues who've come before me. I just want us to sample a few issues that we think are best practices that we can be able to emulate in our journey to Singapore. Number one, colleagues, is please note that we should be able to take prompt corrective action in whichever the circumstance. And this is so because taking prompt corrective action stops any further damage. As the adage goes, it is cheaper to salvage a situation before it gets out of hand. There's a very common Swahili saying that says, "Eri kuziba nyufa kuliko kujenga ukuta." That is basically what we are saying. Take prompt corrective action in whichever the circumstance, because you are likely to stop a situation that will get out of hand. And just as an example, colleagues, we had a recent situation around December of last year where someone went for an interview in one of the counties within the Republic. And after the interview, these results were not relayed, whether there was someone who was successful or a regret letter for those ones who are not successful for the interview. And now that they did not communicate the same, Kenyans being woke, Kenyans knowing their rights, a spirited litigant moved to court and filed a suit against the governor of that particular county. And they were actually awarded a whooping 20 million Kenyan shillings. And don't imagine that this 20 million Kenyan shillings was gotten from the governor's coffers. It is your tax, you and I. When you bought bread in the morning and you've paid 5 shillings as tax, cumulatively, that is how we accumulated to 20 million that this individual was paid because an individual seated somewhere did not take prompt corrective action when they needed to undertake a duty. Let's always remember that in our little way, because we've all understood that all of us are the total sum of what a government is. So let's take prompt corrective action in our own way. And colleagues, let's remember this matrix of consequences that we put up, and as my colleagues Alex and Chumba and Dr. Linda have pointed out, is not a novelty. This is a accumulation of the existing laws. Let's do them. Let's ensure that we have our own domesticated matrix of consequences that we can be making reference to, because it should be our guiding light. The second take-home, colleagues, is let's revise all our HR instruments to align with the existing legislations ranging from the Constitution, that is Article 47, that provides for fair administrative action, the Fair Administrative Action Act itself, that is a legislation that was passed in 2024. Let's make reference to the Employment and the Employment Act. Let's make reference to, as my colleague Mwaniki pointed out, to legislations to do with what has come from the court, from the Employment and Labor Relations Court to the Court of Appeal, up to the Supreme Court. Let's ensure that whatever we have is in tandem with the realities of today. You should note, colleagues, that you should not be interacting with these HR instruments only when you have a disciplinary hearing. These HR instruments are live documents that we should be well aware while we are undertaking our mandate, so that this is the guiding document that helps us to know how we are doing and which particular subsection we need to make reference to when we need to do something. Let's ensure that all our HR manuals and handbooks are uploaded in all our official platforms, colleagues. And this is a rallying call that goes to all our heads of HR, all the HR departments. And if the same is not provided, let's agitate and tell them we got a message from the Office of the Chief of Staff and the Head of Public Service that this is a requirement. Why haven't we seen them? Let's ask for them so that the buck stops with us to ensure that this is provided to us. Colleagues, let's institutionalize as the third take home. Let's institutionalize the refresher training. Colleagues, with these virtual engagements, if the Chief of Staff and the Head of Public Service has been able to undertake such a training, as of now, this session has more than 30,000 people logged in. If we've taken the initiative to do this, why can't we in our different institutions to ensure that we do the refresher trainings over and over again, because no one has the monopoly of knowledge. Even us as presenters who've come this afternoon, we might not be the best presenters that can ever be. There are people here who are attending these meetings who can actually facilitate and do this refresher training better than us, because we are mere civil servants, just like all of you colleagues. All of us, at the end of the day, just rely on that small salary that we get. All of us go through the pains that all of you do. Sometimes, occasionally, we are also reliant on the DSA, like most of you. You know what we're talking about. So we are not saying that we are the best trainers. We're just saying that if all of you take up the mantle in your different institutions to institutionalize this refresher training, we will the knowledge transfer, the knowledge transmission would be at the end of the day. And that is a legacy that we leave for this generation and the generation to come, so that people know that training is a must, and we should continue to do those trainings over and over and over again. Colleagues, as the fourth take home, let's ensure that all our initiatives are citizen-centered and citizen-centric. Let's create a culture of noting that all the initiatives, everything that we are doing in our entities, it is citizens facing, because those are our number one clients. And let's not institutionalize mediocre. Let's not institutionalize not responding to the citizens in time. When the cabinet secretary in charge of public service visited one of the cities we have in this country, we noticed that people are actually reporting to work at 10 a.m. People are actually reporting to work at 9. So at what point will we render the services to the citizens? Let's treat the citizens with dignity, and let's replace the blame culture with solution, so that we do not blame. Let's know the buck stops with you, not everyone else, because we've defined that indeed we are government. As a fifth take-home, colleagues, let's promote the culture of meritocracy over patronage. Let's promote competence and fairness, equal opportunities across all MDAs, as opposed to nepotism, as opposed to tribalism. Let's entrench the culture of meritocracy, because we appreciate that all of us are there because you exceeded in whichever field that you are at. As John Paul II said, even if you are a sweeper, become the best sweeper that has ever been. And that will be acknowledged. Even if it's not acknowledged while we're still on earth, we believe the same will be acknowledged when we go to another realm, whichever, depending on which religion you practice. Your actions will not go unnoticed once you excel and we promote meritocracy. On the final aspect of my presentation, colleagues, what are the key lessons we are getting from Singapore on our road to Singapore? What are the key lessons that we are borrowing as the best culture? Number one, I'll mention about 8. This is not exhaustive. While we are doing our refresher training, now that we've agreed all of you will undertake refresher training, please get even better lessons that is applicable to your different institutions. These are the 8 that we've developed as a team, but we can always ensure that we have better lessons. Number one, is the aspect of integrity. As Martin Luther King Jr. says, the time is always right to do what is right. I think I do not need to explain more than that. And let's remember, colleagues, now that we've taken Singapore, led by the president, as a guiding light, let's make reference to the shared values, which was the official ideology of Singapore adopted in 1991, that has 5 salient issues. Number 1, nation before community and society. Number 2, community support and respect for individual. Consensus as opposed, colleagues, to conflict. There should always be a culture of harmony and emphasis on family. Those were the shared ideologies that was officially adopted as their motto. So even in our different institutions, what are the key shared values that we agree? The aspects that we disagree might be more, but what are the aspects that we all agree? The second key lesson, colleagues, that we got in our literature review is service. Let us have faster, predictable service, which reduces the friction between ourselves and the number 1 client, which is the citizen. Because, colleagues, with the citizen, service delivery is not an admin function. Service delivery is a national productivity tool. Let that not be lost on us. That we do not assume you perform this service because you need to impress your supervisor or your boss. It is a national productivity tool. It is what is binding us as a nation, because all of us should ensure, and this is mandatory, colleagues, that we have service charters, so that while the citizens are coming for the services, they know what to expect, by when and how these services are going to be rendered. And once they are disgruntled, what is the appellate mechanisms? How can they be able to complain once they do not get these services that they are expected of them? This goes hand in hand, colleagues, with the culture of excellence. Excellence, colleagues, is not just a slogan. It is a design choice backed by routine. We are creatures of culture as human beings, colleagues. Let's champion for excellence. And this excellence should be codified with high standards and standards that are enforceable. Because, colleagues, let's remember that excellence is not engineered. Excellence should come with clarity, because what cannot be defined cannot be achieved. Let's carry ourselves with excellence, with the highest possible attained excellence. Equally, colleagues, let's act with discipline, because discipline only thrives when the roles are clear, when there is fairness and consistency in everything that we do. Let us have clear chain of command and accountability. And when I was making my presentation at the beginning, colleagues, I told you that we have the hierarchy. We have the chain of command. This should be the hierarchy in which discipline is enforced. But this does not necessarily mean that this command is supposed to be absolute. In our different departments, in our different entities, colleagues, let's have mechanisms in which all of us know that if there is an issue, there is a way we can be able to communicate. There is a way we can be able to send emails. There is a way where we can be able to write letters. Because when looking at the comments that you're giving us, when you're looking at the feedback that we're getting from you, we find that there are situations which could be handled in our different agencies, but they find themselves at the office of the president. That is not right. That tells you, colleagues, that there is some breakdown, there is a failure in the chain of command, where people do not know where to write, because by the time they have to write to the president, by the time they have to raise concerns to the executive of the president, they are almost at the tail end of the places they can go, because after here, perhaps they can just go to court or even report to God. Because if we fail to report the small things, where do we expect people to write? Because a conversation that is half held is a conversation half solved. Let's provide channels in which conversations can be held. And with this, let's ensure that we enforce strict standards, because standards are explicit and standards are written. We do not expect that people can hope their standards. But as we are codifying these standards, let's ensure they are very easy and verifiable. Let's ensure that the enforceability of these standards is consistent as opposed to being emotional. Let's ensure that there is continuous improvement to loop in the standards that is unclear, because at the end of the day, we should be asking ourselves, what capacity is missing? We should be asking ourselves, what supervision is weak? We should be asking ourselves, what standards that we've put is unrealistic to enforce? Let's ensure that we've normalized asking ourselves that question. And at the end of the day, we'll be able to achieve the highest attainable enforceable standards. Let's ensure, colleagues, that we have proactive services. And why are we saying this? Now that we've all agreed, and I know I'll say this over and again for the 10th time, we are government. If a proactive government waits for a form, it does not respond to the live events. Let's ensure that we become a government, because you and I are government. We become a government that responds to the live events, as opposed to being a government that is reactionary. And when you find people castigating government, that they are saying the government is inept, the government is inefficient, the government is corrupt, just know they're making reference to you and I. They're not making reference to the president. They are not making reference to the deputy president. They're not making reference to the prime cabinet secretary. They're not making reference to the chief of staff and the head of public service. They're not making reference to the cabinet secretaries. They're making reference to you and I. Let's ensure that as a government, we have proactive services that are citizen-centric. And that speaks to the 6th issue of, let's ensure that our services are customer-centric focus. And I don't need to repeat this, colleagues. We've said that our number one client is the citizen. Let's ensure that all our initiatives are working towards the citizens, who are the ones that are paying our salaries today, who are paying taxes to ensure the government is able to operate. That is our number one client. So every initiative that we put in place should be citizen-centric. And this married together with the issue of efficiency and innovation, by ensuring that we've given an opportunity to this generation that is coming up that is more innovative, an opportunity to AI, an opportunity to technology, like what we've done with this virtual engagement. It speaks to ensure that our road to Singapore will not be mad, but it become a reality. Colleagues, as I conclude, please be informed that the president is having their if all of us were able to follow the president's New Year's address, he made reference to the plan to conduct an accountability summit sometime in March. This summit is where we are bringing all arms of government to have a self-reflection on what can be improved to ensure that our journey to Singapore becomes a reality. This accountability summit will bring all arms of government, and the representatives of the executive are ourselves, to ensure that we have a seminar, we have a workshop to ask ourselves, what can we do better? Which entity is dragging us behind towards ensuring that we are accountable to a Mwananchi, we are accountable to Wanjiku? This summit, you'll receive communication very soon for you to give your views towards this accountability summit. But as I conclude, colleagues, remember, the journey to Singapore is inevitable. It's just a matter of time for us to achieve first world status within our generation, as being the rallying call by the president. Thank you for your time. Thank you for the listening ear. And now that we are coming to an end of the session, and we don't want to take more time than we promised, because by the Kenyan time, it's just 2 minutes past 4 p.m. Let's bow our heads and believe and pray. In the name of the Father, the Son, and the Holy Spirit. Amen. God the Father, God the Son, God the Holy Spirit. We thank you for the gift of life. We thank you for the wonderful conversation we've had with our colleagues from different sectors, from different cadres within the public service. As we conclude this session, may you continue to give us knowledge, wisdom, and understanding as we undertake the service for the betterment of the country, for the betterment of the services that we're rendering to Mwananchi. May all of that we've learned, we can be able to implement, and may everything that we do be pleasing to you and be pleasing to man. I pray this trusting and believing in Jesus' name I pray. May, and the word of God said, Amen. Amen.